So if we go back to the early 1950s, psychiatric wards were they were fundamentally transformed overnight.
Oh, absolutely. Like completely revolutionized.
Yeah, and it wasn't because of some new therapy technique or anything like that. It was actually because of a single chemical compound.
One that was originally developed as a surgical anesthetic, interestingly enough.
Exactly. And when doctors gave it to patients suffering from, severe psychosis, it acted like what some called a chemical lobotomy.
Which sounds harsh, but yeah, that was the birth of the first-generation antipsychotic.
It totally altered the trajectory of modern medicine.
It really was a watershed moment.
Yeah.
Because before that point, management of severe mental illness relied really heavily on physical restraints or highly invasive procedures.
Right.
So chemistry suddenly offered a way to manage symptoms that had previously been considered totally untreatable. But as we'll see today, that first medical breakthrough was, well, it was incredibly blunt.
Blunt is definitely a good word for it. And today, your mission as the listener for this deep dive is to track that exact evolution, because we are tackling a very daunting, highly specific list of 17 antipsychotic medications.
17 is a lot to keep straight.
It is a massive list, and if you're prepping for a clinical board exam or maybe cashing up for a nursing rotation or, just trying to organize your notes, staring at 17 chemical compounds can induce immediate mental friction.
Oh, for sure. It just looks like identical alphabet soup on the page.
Right. You've got all these X's, Z's, and syllables that just blur together.
And the human brain naturally rejects unstructured data like that. You can't just stare at a vertical list of 17 generic and brand names and expect them to magically stick.
No, you really can't. Okay, let's unpack this, because our goal for today's deep dive isn't to just, read a textbook list at you.
That would be incredibly boring.
Exactly. Instead, we're going to build a clinical memory palace. We'll rely on phonetic patterns, sure, but we're also going to anchor those names to how they actually function in the human body.
That functional piece is key.
Yeah. So by the end, you'll be able to navigate all the way from Haldol to Neplazid without second-guessing yourself at all.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the absolute most effective way to memorize these drugs is to observe how they're officially classified chronologically.
Like looking at the historical timeline.
Right, you really have to see the eras.
Mm-hmm.
They're divided into 3 distinct evolutionary eras. You have the first generation, which we call traditional.
Okay, the traditional one.
Then the second generation, which is atypical. Finally, the third generation, which is also considered atypical.
Got it. So let's start right in the 1950s with that first generation, the traditional vanguard. Functionally speaking, what was that first breakthrough actually doing in the brain?
Well, first-generation antipsychotics are essentially dopamine sledgehammers.
Sledgehammers, wow.
Yeah, because psychosis, simply put, involves an overactivity of dopamine in certain pathways of the brain. So these early drugs were designed to go in and aggressively block dopamine receptors.
So they just shut the signaling down entirely.
Completely shut it down.
Dopamine sledgehammer. Okay, got it. So let's map out the names in this traditional generation. The list we have includes Haldol, Thorazine, Prolixin, Trilafon, Loxitane, Navane, and Stelazine.
Right, that's the core group.
Now, right away, if you look at the generic names for these drugs, there is a massive linguistic pattern that emerges. 4 of them belong to the azine family.
The azines, yes.
Yeah, we have chlorpromazine, fluphenazine, perphenazine, and trifluoperazine.
That azine suffix is your absolute anchor to the traditional first-generation era. But to remember which brand name pairs with which generic, we need some sticky clinical associations.
Exactly.
So let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the brand name Thorazine, which is chlorpromazine.
Okay, Thorazine and chlorpromazine. I'm picturing the god of thunder himself, Thor, representing Thorazine, and he's standing by a swimming pool aggressively cleaning it with chlorine.
For using chlorine, I like that.
Right, which gives us chlorpromazine, but we need a clinical tie-in here to really lock it down.
Well, chlorpromazine is notorious on clinical exams for causing corneal deposits in the eyes.
Oh, perfect. So Thor is cleaning the pool with chlorine, but the chlorine splashes up into his eyes and causes corneal deposits.
That is a great visual.
Yeah, you have Thorazine, chlorpromazine, and a high-yield clinical side effect all in one image.
Let's move to the next azine. We have the brand name Prolixin, which is paired with the generic fluphenazine.
Let me think about how to link those. Prolixin and fluphenazine. Okay, well, the generic has flu right in the word. Fluphenazine.
Right, flu.
So Thor is by the pool. His eyes hurt from the chlorine, and now he's getting sick. He caught the flu. And to cure his flu, he takes a professional elixir, Prolixin, a professional elixir for the flu.
A pro-elixir for the flu. Prolixin is fluphenazine. That works really well.
Nice. What do we do with Trilafon, the brand name for perphenazine?
Trilafon sounds exactly like a trilling telephone.
Oh, it does. Trilafon. Shilling phone. Okay, imagine a vintage rotary telephone sitting on a desk.
Yeah.
And it is in absolutely perfect condition.
And perfect gives us the perf in perphenazine.
Exactly. A perfect trilling telephone. Trilafon maps to perphenazine.
Brilliant. And the final member of our azine core is the brand name Stelazine, which is trifluoperazine.
Okay, Stelazine immediately brings up the word stellar, like the stars. So imagine you're looking up at a stellar night sky, and what is flying through that stellar sky? 3 UFOs.
Trifluoperazine.
Yes, stellar stars, 3 UFOs. Stelazine is trifluoperazine.
That neatly locks down the 4 zines. But this first-generation sledgehammer class has 3 other drugs that do not share that suffix.
Right, the outliers.
And the most famous outlier being Haldol, which is the brand name for haloperidol.
Honestly, Haldol and haloperidol are a gift.
They really are.
They mirror each other beautifully. They both act as the halo of the traditional generation. You just, follow the halo.
Simple enough.
Yeah.
That leaves us with 2 final pairs in the first generation. Loxitane, which is loxapine, and Navane, which is thiothixene.
Well, Loxitane and loxapine is another freebie because they share that lox root. Just picture a heavy vintage padlock. You are locking it in.
Locking in Loxitane and loxapine.
Right. Now, Navane and thiothixene. Navane sounds like navigate, and thiothixene has that harsh double fish sound. Thiothixene.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
So imagine you have to navigate your way through a thick forest. Navane is navigating the thick forest of thiothixene.
Excellent. So we have our first generation mapped, but we have to talk about the reality of treating patients with these dopamine sledgehammers.
Yeah.
Because it created a massive crisis.
Because of the side effects. Really.
Exactly. Remember, dopamine doesn't just regulate psychosis, it regulates movement.
Right, of course. So if you sledgehammer the dopamine just to stop the hallucinations, you're also basically paralyzing the body's ability to move smoothly.
Precisely. Patients on these first-generation azines developed severe motor tremors, muscle rigidity, and these involuntary facial disgust.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it looked incredibly similar to Parkinson's disease. So the medical community realized they were in a huge bind. How do we treat the mind without freezing the body?
Which is what forced the invention of the second generation.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the atypicals. Let me push back on that term for a second, though. What does this all mean for the word atypical?
It's a fair question.
Because if there is an entire second generation, and as we'll see, a third generation, are these really atypical anymore, or are they just the new standard?
It's a total semantic relic, really. Historically, they were called atypical simply because they were a departure from the traditional azines.
I see.
They didn't cause those severe motor side effects in the exact same ways. Today, yes, the atypicals are the most commonly prescribed. They're absolutely the new normal.
So how did they solve the sledgehammer problem? What was the new mechanism?
Instead of a sledgehammer, the second-generation drugs act more like a complex combination lock.
A combination lock?
Yeah, they don't just target dopamine, they introduce serotonin antagonism into the mix.
Oh, interesting.
By blocking specific serotonin receptors alongside the dopamine receptors, they found they could manage the psychosis while significantly lowering the risk of those Parkinson-like motor tremors.
A combination lock. I really like that visual.
Yeah.
So we are in the second generation era, and the drugs here are Risperdal, Zyprexa, Seroquel, Ziprasidone, and Latuda.
Right.
Since the azines are history, what are the new phonetic patterns you need to look out for?
For this generation, you need to isolate 2 new families, the Duns and the Pines. Let's tackle the Duns first.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because the visual imagery here is great. Let's look at the brand name Risperdal, which pairs with the generic risperidone.
You can really hear that Dun suffix, risperidone.
Yeah, clearly. So to remember this, focus on the whisper part of Risperdal. It sounds like whisper. So picture someone whispering into a combination lock. Risperdal is risperidone.
And you can link that whispering directly to the next drug in the Dun family, which is Latuda. The generic is lurasidone.
Okay, so the whispering person, they have an attitude. Latuda sounds like attitude.
Definitely.
And what are they doing with that whispering attitude? They are trying to lure you in, lure for lurasidone. So an attitude trying to lure you in. Latuda is lurasidone.
The third member of our Dun family is the generic Ziprasidone, which goes by the brand name Geodon.
Geodon makes me think of a geode. You know, one of those hollow rocks filled with the sparkling purple crystals?
Oh, sure.
And Ziprasidone sounds like a zipper. So imagine a giant sparkling geode with a literal zipper running right down the middle of it. You are zipping up a geometric shape. Ziprasidone is Geodon.
I love that. That covers the Duns. Now, let's look at the remaining two medications in this second generation. They belong to the pine family. We have the brand name Zyprexa, which is olanzapine, and Seroquel, which is quetiapine.
Zyprexa and olanzapine. Well, Zyprexa starts with a very sharp Z, and olanzapine starts with a really round O.
Right.
So imagine a giant letter Z and a giant letter O standing next to a pine tree, since we're in the pine family. A Z and an O at the pine tree. Zyprexa is olanzapine.
Spot on. And for Seroquel, the generic is quetiapine.
This one is actually satisfying to spell. Quetiapine has the word quiet hidden right inside it. Queti. Quiet.
It does.
And Seroquel sounds like sequel. So imagine a movie theater playing the sequel to a movie, and the audience is perfectly quiet. Quiet sequel. Seroquel maps quetiapine.
Perfect. If you master the whispering Duns and the quiet pines, you've successfully navigated the second wave. You've gone from the sledgehammer to the combination lock.
But wait, if the second generation solved the motor tremors, why did we even need a third generation? Like, what forced science to evolve yet again?
Well, because the combination lock had its own massive flaw.
Ah, of course.
While the Duns and pines spared the patient's motor function, they severely impacted their metabolism.
Oh, no.
Yeah, patients began experiencing massive weight gain, lipid abnormalities, and metabolic syndrome.
That's a huge trade-off.
It really was.
Yeah.
So science had to go back to the drawing board to find a much more elegant mechanism.
Enter the third generation, the modern era. Still classified as atypical, but functionally a huge leap forward. The drugs here are Abilify, Rexulti, Vraylar, Caplyta, and Nuplazid.
Right.
So if Gen 1 was a sledgehammer and Gen 2 was a combination lock, what is Gen 3?
Gen 3 acts like a smart thermostat.
Yeah.
Or, if you prefer, high-end noise-canceling headphones.
Noise-canceling headphones.
Yeah, because instead of just blocking receptors entirely, many of these drugs are partial agonists.
Okay, let me make sure I have this straight. A partial agonist means it doesn't just shut the dopamine signal off completely. It actually listens to the brain's environment. So if dopamine is too high, it dials it down.
Yeah.
But if dopamine is too low, it actually dials it up to a healthy baseline level.
Yes, it regulates rather than strictly blocking. And as you might expect, we have a completely new generic suffix for these modern regulators.
A nice suffix.
We leave the Duns and pines behind, and we welcome the prazoles.
The prazoles. Okay, let's group those siblings first. We have the brand name Abilify, which is the generic aripiprazole, and Rexulti, which is brexpiprazole.
Now, aripiprazole is notoriously difficult to spell on an exam.
Oh, it really is.
Right.
So the trick is you have the ability to spell aripiprazole. Ability gives you Abilify. If you have the ability, you can spell aripiprazole.
I like that.
And then right next to it, we have Rexulti, which is brexpiprazole. Both the brand and the generic share that hard Rex sound. Rexulti and brexpiprazole.
Yes, they do.
So I just picture a literal Tyrannosaurus Rex wearing noise-canceling headphones acting as a partial agonist. Rexulti is brexpiprazole.
That's a very vivid image. Now we have a couple of modern oddballs in this generation. They don't share a simple suffix, so the imagery needs to do the heavy lifting here.
Okay.
We have the brand name Vraylar, which is cariprazine.
Vraylar and cariprazine. Well, cariprazine starts with car, and Vraylar sounds like some distant sci-fi destination, like a colony on Mars or something.
It does sound futuristic.
So you are driving your space cars to the planet Vraylar. Cariprazine maps to Vraylar.
Next is the brand name Caplyta, which pairs with the generic lumateperone.
Look at the beginning of lumateperone, lum. It instantly brings up the word luminous, glowing light.
Luminous, right.
So picture a glowing luminous capsule, a luminous light coming from Caplyta. Lumateperone is Caplyta.
Which brings us to the final medication on our list, the specialist. The brand name is Nuplazid, and the generic is pimavanserin.
The specialist.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how this ties our entire journey together. This is the absolute only drug in your source material that has a specific singular condition attached to it.
Really? Just one condition?
Yes. It is specifically for Parkinson's psychosis.
Hold on, let me connect the dots here. Earlier, we talked about how the first-generation sledgehammers caused side effects that look like Parkinson's disease by blocking dopamine.
Exactly.
But actual Parkinson's patients who are losing dopamine naturally can sometimes develop psychosis on their own, and you can't give them a traditional antipsychotic, or you'll make their motor symptoms catastrophically worse.
Precisely. You need a drug that completely avoids the dopamine D2 receptors altogether so it doesn't worsen the tremors, but it still manages the hallucinations. That is exactly what Nuplazid does.
That is an incredibly high-yield clinical fact right there. If you are reading a case study and you see Parkinson's psychosis, your brain needs to instantly bypass all the azines, the duns, and the prazoles and jump straight to Nuplazid pimavanserin.
It's in a class of its own.
So how do we anchor that?
We need to link Nuplazid, pimavanserin, and Parkinson's.
Okay, let's visualize this. Nuplazid sounds like new plaid. Imagine a sharply tailored new plaid suit. You are wearing your new plaid suit to the Parkinson's clinic.
Okay, Nuplazid.
But who's driving you there? You're in a van, a pimavanserin. You are in a van wearing new plaid going to the Parkinson's clinic. Nuplazid is pimavanserin.
And with that, you've conquered all 17. You have the full map of the antipsychotic landscape.
Let's do a quick structural review to lock the doors on this memory palace. The trick to recalling this information isn't brute force flashcards. When you encounter these names in the wild, your first step is to categorize them by their era and mechanism.
Right. You just ask yourself, is this a first-generation sledgehammer, a second-generation combination lock, or a third-generation thermostat?
Exactly.
And you find the answer by spotting the phonetic families.
If you see an azine like chlorpromazine or fluphenazine, you know you're dealing with a first-generation traditional drug. If you spot the duns or the pines like risperidone or olanzapine, you are in the second-generation atypical era. And if you see the prazoles, like aripiprazole, you're working with the third-generation modern regulators.
And of course, you keep Nuplazid, or pimavanserin, in its own heavily guarded mental folder, the designated specialist for Parkinson's psychosis.
You know, as we wrap up, I'm stuck on something I noticed about the progression of these brand names. We started in the 1950s with Thorazine, which sounds like a mythological hammer. Very blunt, very heavy.
Yeah, very aggressive.
Then we moved to Latuda, which sounds a bit more abstract, like an attitude. And now we are at Vraylar and Caplita. They literally sound like alien planets or high-concept science fiction.
They really do.
It makes you wonder, why do pharmaceutical companies choose such otherworldly, futuristic names for these modern compounds? When we create medications for the heart or the lungs, they usually sound very clinical and anatomical. But when we create compounds designed to alter the chemistry of the human brain, they brand them like magic spells. What does that say about the lingering mystery of how we view the human mind? Something for you to ponder as you review your notes today.